Hello and happy Friday the 13th. Welcome to Scream Film, where we usually analyze movies and genres and discuss them. Today, this is going to be a bonus video. Today, with it being Friday the 13th, I thought it'd be fun and do my own tier list of the Friday the 13th movies. This is going to be more of a biased video of just my own opinions, nothing intellectual about it really. It's just more of which movie I like watching over the other. Eventually, I would like to cover all these movies. I have an idea for those, but in those videos, it's going to be more intellectual and about the movies themselves in a detailed manner. And then maybe if I wanted to, I could do a tier list of those after analyzing all of them to make it more knowledge based. So with that in mind, let's go ahead and get straight into it. So here's the list. If you can't tell, it is listed from Friday the 13th from 1980 all the way in synchronized order to 2009's Friday the 13th. So to quickly explain my tiers real quick, S tier is I will watch this even off of Friday the 13th, like a sit down, relax movie. Don't judge me. A is, it is still good, but I have different movies above it. B is decent. C is realistically in this is going to be average tier unless I change that to B. It depends. And then F tier is it's bad. And yeah, we'll be using every single tier in this. So to start off with Friday the 13th Part 1. Well, I'm going to put it in C for now so we can discuss it. So, Friday the 13th from 1980. It helped revolutionize the rating system of the 1980s with, Tom Savini's score, which is very done beautifully. But if you kind of take away from that nostalgia, it's really just a mid-tier movie. What I mean is, the original idea of Friday the 13th was based off of Sean Cunningham basically being like, hey, I just saw Halloween, which came out a year earlier. I want to do that, but at a camp. And then there it is. So, it follows a lot of what Halloween does. It has a lot of first-person view shots of the killer holding a weapon. You don't know really who the killer is until near the end. Like, you don't see their face in a way. It's a bunch of teenagers, dying. And a lot of people in the town are kind of meh. But that one doesn't really technically count with Halloween, but just stating. Realistically, it's the stereotypical horror movie of there's a killer, horny teens, someone from the town's like, oh, you're all doomed, oh no. I want to say that definitely overall, Friday the 13th is a B tier in the middle. It's a good movie, but comparing with the other Friday the 13th, it feels bland and kind of weird and lonely. So now on to Friday the 13th Part 2. Again, I'm not putting this in its spot just yet, just so we have it out so we can talk about it. Friday the 13th Part 2 came out in 1981. Basically was filmed like 6 or so months after the first one was in theaters because it made a lot of money and they knew what they were doing. For those that don't know, this is technically the first movie that Jason is in as the killer, but he's not really developed yet, and he's a goober, basically, in how he acts, not how he looks. You're a bully if you call him out for his looks. This movie also does have some of the things that the first one did, which is kind of boring. For me, I will definitely watch this. Like, I'll watch any of them except for one of them, which I'll get to. But it kind of has the same ordeal. I definitely think the characters in this movie are better than from the first one. So realistically, I'm going to put it in A tier. Bottom of A tier. Only because the characters are more interesting. There's a lot more that happened. There's a lot of production disasters that happened. Like, Jason is played by like 2 different stuntmen. The main guy who was Jason didn't get along with, I think, just the cast. Maybe some of production. But it was a little bit of a disaster. But it's still a good movie. There's definitely some goofy things in it. I would show them, but I don't know entirely what I can show of that scene. But just letting you know, if you look carefully in one scene, you will see the cameraman in a mirror, and it's really funny. But overall, the movie does really good. It builds up of what Friday the 13th Part 1 did, and did it better. There's more kills. It's not as gory because Tom Savini isn't, in charge of it because he thought the idea of Jason being the killer was stupid. So the gore for at least this movie is toned down. It's kind of toned down in Part 3 as well, which we're going to get to next. But it's definitely unique, and you don't really get something like Part 2 ever anymore. So now on to Part 3. Now, this movie is interesting. Released in 1982. For those that don't really understand real quickly, basically there's a Friday the 13th for almost every single year in the 80s except for 87 because they took a break from Part 6 and 7, which makes sense. With this movie, they decided to do the 3D thing, if you couldn't tell by him stabbing the shower curtain in the poster. This one was also a production mess, mostly because of them trying to use new 3D technology. The camera, I don't remember what it's called. I'll have a picture of it, but they really had a hassle with that, and most of the budget went to that camera. and it was a disaster, production-wise, not how it turned out. But if you see like people purposely like pointing stuff at the camera, that's why. But like at the beginning, you have the baseball bat, you have Shelly throwing the wallet, you have the snake, you have the guy with the eyeball pointing at the camera. A lot of this was just to sell that 3D effect. I think the only good use of the 3D effect is Rick's death, even though you can totally tell it's an eyeball on a string. But it's really goofy, but it's really fun to watch. You have Andy's death, which is pretty brutal, which I really enjoy. Shelly has a good solid throat slit. You just see him with his throat opened. And you know, there are a lot of good deaths, but I feel like this movie is purposely just trying to sell off the 3D effect, which kind of ruins a lot of the problems. As well, it kind of goes back to the first one in a lot of it, as in you have the ending, which is basically a knockoff of the first one, where the final girl is attacked by an undead being. We'll call it that because in the first one it was Jason, and part 3 it is Pamela Voorhees, drags the character in the water, and then, oh, it's a dream, oh no. So it copies a lot of the first one, so it's kind of mediocre. So with that in mind, as much as I enjoy watching this one, I'm gonna put it above the first one, right behind part 2. Realistically, this one, again, it has the whole idea of Jason wearing the mask, which is good, but he's clumsy in this. That's the thing. Jason eventually doesn't get clumsy. With the first few movies that he's in, he just gets clumsy and it's weird. So now on to the final chapter, which most people would say is their favorite, and I would agree with them on that. Just quickly move it up here. The final chapter was really good. You have everything scratched off. It's the first movie where Jason has his mask the whole time. The kills are usually and mostly unique. You have Tom Savini back as the makeup and special effects, so you know the kills are very gory. You have a good base of a family and teenagers, so you're still filling in that role of with 80s slashers with nudity and everything. You're still getting all of that, as well as having another set of people to care about. And, you know, this is the first one with Tommy Jarvis, and that kind of goes through with 2 more movies. But in general, this movie does very well with its storytelling. The gore is really good. And originally, this was supposed to be the last movie, hence the name The Final Chapter. And that's one of the reasons why they killed off Jason at the end. And that's why Tom Savini came back, because he created him and he wanted to kill him. Basically, you know, the whole mother role of, I brought you into this world, I can take you out of it ordeal. And this movie just is a fun time to watch. Definitely out of the first 4 movies, it perfected the Friday the 13th baseline. So now onto a movie that is very different, and that is A New Beginning. A New Beginning is a mess. That's least to say. There is so much weird stuff that happens in this movie. Obviously, if you've seen it, you know that basically everyone is cracked out of their minds. Not on drugs, though. So in a lot of the documentaries, a lot of the cast said that the director, Danny Steinman, basically just let them do whatever they want, which for most parts is a good thing, to like let your cast create their own characters, not base it off a script. But his directing is not the best. So he actually started off making adult films, which if you give an adult film director a movie where there's supposed to be sex in it, it's gonna go miserably. The movie is definitely one of the sleaziest horror movies I've seen. It's very disturbing to be like, oh yeah, we're gonna have like 10 seconds overall, maybe more, of one of the characters just topless, and we're just gonna stare at it, you know? It's very disgusting, honestly. From what I have heard, he was under the influence of sniffing the white powder a little bit too much. I think every time they were filming, he was a little bit off his mind, which as a production is not a good idea. If you're going to be a director, you have to be kind of the person on top. It is your film. You're supposed to be in charge of everything. You're not supposed to be more laid back of how characters are supposed to be. It definitely helps with this movie to create unique people for, you know, the mental house that they're in. It's not really a mental house, but like an outside. You understand. But this movie is very sleazy. It's okay to me, but in general, if you're going to be directing a horror movie, don't make it as sleazy as possible. That's my issue. As well, within that scene with the 2 teenagers in the woods, I forgot their names, you know, the sleazy shots, they also have a character staring at them while, you know, they are doing the act, which is very disturbing to process. Some of the gore is okay, I will say, but a lot of it is just cheap. I don't know why. Violet's death was changed. She was supposed to have a way more brutal death, and they changed it to what looks like a pillow getting stabbed. It's very cheap. They do a lot of machete kills that are basic, and it's kind of lame. Realistically, with that in mind, I'm actually going to put it behind or in front of the first one, which is very controversial to say. But comparing part 5 to part 1, you get more enjoyment out of the weird characters that are in part 5. Like, you literally have a character who threatens a cop that she has a bomb on her. Like, just out of the blue. You don't really get that anymore in this series. You don't get just a random person being like, you know what? I'm gonna threaten a cop today. It's very interesting. It also kind of delves into Tommy a little bit, even though he does literally nothing except for whenever he gets picked on, he beats the living crap out of people. Pam is also a good character, but then again, she's supposed to be the final girl, and you have a sleazy director, so obviously she's wearing her white shirt and is rolling all over the mud because he told her so. In general, if you are wanting a more laid-back time, this movie is pretty good for that. It definitely has interesting and unique characters, but it also falls into Jason isn't the killer, which can bum out some people. As well, it doesn't really do a good job of making sense of the killer. Like, it's Roy Burns who was Joey's dad. They set that up in a very boring way, and you can tell it's going to be him as the killer. Same thing how they did it with Pamela Voorhees. She just shows up out of nowhere, and it's like, oh, we're adding a new character into the story. Obviously, she's going to be the killer. It's very cliche and very boring, but it also has some uniqueness to it. And that's why it is in front of the first movie. Now, on to 86. At this point, just in general, a lot of the gore from Friday the 13th was getting shut down by the rating system. So this is the movie where they definitely get into the PG-13 style of kills. But with Jason Lives as an S-tier movie. Now, I know I'm definitely going off with a lot of the fan base with this, but the first version of zombified Jason is cool. You have an adult Tommy Jarvis, who the town thinks he's crazy because he's had this whole situation with Jason. But, you know, we follow him and he accidentally resurrects Jason. Realistically, we didn't need this movie, obviously. But, you know, there's good money to be made on a lot of sequels. But just definitely this version of Jason is so cool, dude. Like, at this point, I'm gonna do a thing. I think it's a little bit better than the final chapter. Now, personally, these two can switch. 100% these two can switch. But I definitely think I like Jason Lives maybe a tad bit more. It has some goofy parts in it, but it definitely is at to this point where a lot of the slashers are trying not to be scary. Like, I believe at this point, Freddy has started to not be as much as a serious character as he was, which makes sense for Jason to also do that, or at least the characters in it. But as well with the score of this movie, the score is really good. You have Alice Cooper doing, I think, 2 to 3 songs in this, really good. You have the orchestra that is also used in this, phenomenal. This is a very popular look of Jason. You show a picture of Part 6 Jason, everyone's gonna be like, oh, that's Jason Voorhees. I would definitely say a lot of people definitely were more interested in this movie. It was not as gory as the other ones, but also definitely has some unique kills in it. Is it a little overrated? Maybe a little bit, but in general, this one, it didn't take a note out of Part 5's characters, but there's just, it feels more enjoyable than a lot of them. Like, the writing actually isn't that bad. The cinematography is pretty decent. The music is good, like I discussed. And like, you're not really questioning what is happening all the time in this movie. You just sit back and you're like embracing what's happening. And that's why I think it's definitely one of my favorites, if not my favorite Friday the 13th film. So now we're gonna move up to 1988 with Part 7's The New Blood. This movie is actually enjoyable. And that's why, as of now, is going in front of Part 2. Now, with this one, we have Kane Hodder as Jason, which big step up. He definitely portrays Jason in a very fun and terrifying way. This is also the infamous sleeping bag kill, which kind of proves how strong Jason has become. You know, not that he's more machine now than man, twisted and evil, but you know, he definitely is more terrifying in this movie. Again, this movie also dealt with the whole rating system shutting down a lot of the gory kills, but some of them actually work pretty fun. Like, again, the sleeping bag kill, it was supposed to be multiple times where he hit her on the tree. They changed it to one, and it kind of was more of a brutal way of processing how strong he is. This is also the first time and only time Jason actually uses a electronic weapon to kill someone, you know, with the weed whacker. Also, I'm just gonna point out, the main character is like psychokinetic teenager against Jason Voorhees. What on earth is this? That's definitely why I think it's very unique. You're dealing with a girl who is basically Carrie from, you know, Carrie, fighting off a undead serial killer, basically. That is, like, what? The characters, some of them, are actually pretty enjoyable to actually see. A lot of them are really fun to see die. I believe her name's Melissa. She is the, I mean, I guess it's been over a minute, the blonde bitch stereotype of horror movies. She's the brat of the movie. She gets like one of the coolest deaths in this. It's actually one of my favorites, mostly because it's just like, oh, we're actually seeing it. For those that don't know, she decides to open a door, and our favorite man is on the opposite side with an axe to grind, and he places it gently on her and gives her a little push. As in, he plants that thing into her head and yeets her across the room, having her body crumple behind a cabinet. What? What in WWE is going on? It is so cool. Also, Jason gets headbutted by a decapitated head in a plant. What? Like, this movie was able to create unique ways to have Jason fight someone, and it's working pretty well. Although I will say the dead dad situation is really boring and cringe, and her trying to bring back her father and brings back Jason is cliche. It's not as cliche as other things that the series has done, but it's definitely like they wanted to create an idea, and it wasn't having her bring Jason back alive is a whole mistake, obviously. But the only thing that's like gets weird as that is like Dream Warriors and maybe Dream Master from the Nightmare on Elm Street. Don't quote me on that, please, but it's definitely a very unique piece, and that's definitely why I think it probably is my third favorite movie. Now on to Jason Takes Manhattan. This movie is mediocre, basically. The issue is their funding got screwed over because they wanted to film, you know, in New York. They did not have the budget to film in New York. That's why it was substituted to the Lazarus, which is basically the Titanic 2.0. I say that because it's a boat. This movie is not as interesting as Part 7. It has baby kid Jason, which is very weird with hair. It doesn't really make sense for the plot because it's sounding like the main character has a connection to Jason when she doesn't. And a lot of the kills are okay. Like Julius's head getting knocked off by Jason by boxing him on a roof is pretty cool. I definitely really like the infamous shot of this movie of Jason in Times Square looking around. I think that's a very cool shot. But I feel like the story of it kind of got toned down because they kind of got screwed on their production and their cost. It does a lot of weird stuff. It looks goofy at sometimes, but the look of Jason is really cool. I'm gonna put it behind Part 3. Part 3 to me is more enjoyable because of how goofy it really is. It's not as goofy as Part 5, which kind of takes away from the whole horror part of Part 5. Part 8 does have a lot of horror stuff compared to it, but I feel like Part 8 had an expectation to be made, and they got screwed over because they just didn't have enough money. And I think that's probably why it's underneath Part 3. Now for Jason Goes to Hell. I'm just gonna immediately put it in C tier. Realistically, it is an okay movie. I have only seen this movie once or twice. The idea of Jason in this is unique, I guess, of him being like this demonic worm who takes over people's bodies. It's definitely interesting, but why is this being shown in Part 9? That's my question. If they wanted to roll with this idea, they should have done it in like Part 4 or 5, not Part 9, near the end of the series. A lot of the kills have gotten gorier, which is really good with the non-rated version. We're at this point where a lot of non-rated movies are being made, which is good. Jason's barely in it as himself. He has a cool design, but realistically, it's kind of flawed because he's barely in it. Again, the story is unique with them being like, oh, he's actually a demonic worm thing, and he can't go into a Voorhees or else he'll become 10 times stronger or whatever. I don't understand. It's a unique idea, but it kind of falls flat a little bit. Some of the characters are enjoyable to watch, but I feel like this movie, it would be higher if the fact that I feel like it's just a little bit too late for this series. We're expecting at this point a cheesy movie of the Friday the 13th by Part 9, but with it kind of trying to do its own thing, I will give it praise, but it just falls flat for me. And I probably think it's because it is the 9th movie and it's not like the 5th movie or something. And it just kind of doesn't feel like a Friday film at most because you're just seeing someone who's taken over by Jason with the worm. It feels like an average day in, I don't know, pick the most dangerous city in the United States. There you go. It's like that. It doesn't feel like a Friday film a little bit. When it has Jason in it, it feels like a Friday film. With him only being in like maybe 20 minutes tops, not even, of this movie, it's kind of lame. Although I will say this movie also kind of brings up the point that Friday the 13th and Evil Dead is connected because there is a Necronomicon in the movie near the end. But I don't know how official canon that is within the story of Evil Dead, and I'm not going to touch in on it. Now to Jason X. Jason X, not putting it here officially, at best is cheesy. Again, this movie was released in 2001, so we got a lot of digital technology being made, which is cool. Uber Jason can be scary at times. It just feels weird. This movie is okay, I will say. A lot of the kills are unique, although the CG is definitely 2000s and it definitely does not age. But there are a lot of decent kills in this. Like Jason's death is really brutal. You have the one girl with the liquid nitrogen death. That's a really cool death. But I think the fact that at this time we're getting into more space movies, like eventually, I'm surprised Nightmare on Elm Street and Halloween hasn't done it yet. A lot of horror movie characters eventually will go to space. You have Hellraiser who went to space, Leprechaun went to space, and then also Jason went to space. This movie tried. It definitely tried. There are some unique things in it. They actually try their best to create a new atmosphere for Jason to evolve to, but a lot of it just kind of sucks in a way. Like, the characters themselves are lackluster at best. I will say the camp scene where they do the VR thing with Jason, and it's the whole camp like VR with the two chicks, that's a really funny scene, I will say, and him immediately just going to sleeping bag kills. It's funny. Again, I don't know if it's just, it doesn't feel like a Friday the 13th. I don't know if that's because they rebranded it. Same thing with Jason Goes to Hell. They didn't officially call it a Friday the 13th. This one's just Jason X. So there are some parts where it doesn't feel like a Friday film, and I don't know if it's just the idea was a little bit too far reached or what. It definitely is going above Jason Goes to Hell. Why? Jason is in this way more. The deaths are very unique, although the CG doesn't hold up. The story's kind of bland at most times. I don't really know. It could just be the fact that I haven't watched this as much as the originals, and I have a bias over the first 8 or so films, and we're getting into territory where I'm like a little on movies of the Friday 13th franchise. I definitely think if I watch this more often, I'll actually enjoy it more. So it's gonna stay at the bottom of C tier, but not the worst film. Now, on to 2003, after the idea of Freddy vs. Jason coming to fruition, and the idea of it from Jason Goes to Hell. I hate this movie. I generally hate this movie. The only good thing about this movie is the 20-ish minutes of Freddy and Jason actually battling. The other plot sucks. I hate this movie. It's generally like my least favorite Friday film, if you can call it a Friday the 13th film. One, early 2000s. The early 2000s was not the best of horror. It sucked in a lot of ways. Definitely my least favorite years of horror. You get just that early 2000s look. There's way too much slow-mo in this. Characters they're flying across like the set, getting hit by a very dull machete, which I'm gonna talk about that. No, Jason Voorhees, when he's in the hospital, he cuts he looks like I feel like his name was Fred or something. He gets cut in half. And then later, like while they're in New Jersey, because that's where Crystal Lake is, the one chick, she's really annoying, I guess. She gets hit with the machete and she just goes flying across the forest and hits a tree. Like, it doesn't feel in the same realm. Like, seeing how strong Jason is and being able to cut a dude in half is very cool. But then seeing him somehow, like, the machete not, like, cut into her and she just goes flying is stupid. Definitely my least favorite line in this, and I feel like I've said this before, is, wait a minute, Freddy died by fire, Jason by water. How can we use that against them? And the main final girl says this line!
Wait a minute, Freddy died by fire, Jason by water. How can we use that?
What on earth is this script? The script sucks. My issue with this movie is the story and just how the characters interact with each other. The physical stuff of all the gore stuff is good, but I hate it. I hate the story. Every time I watch this movie, I hate every single time I get to, especially that scene. Freddy was just burned alive. That doesn't mean that he has a thing against fire. His thing is a boiler room. What? And Jason drowned because he couldn't know how to swim, which eventually he actually got and became a good swimmer throughout the Friday films. Just because he drowned doesn't mean he's afraid of water. It is the dumbest line. It makes no sense. The characters are such 2000s characters. I hate it. I hate it. So cringe. So if you couldn't tell, it is F tier because it sucks. So after getting all my frustrations out, we're able to move 6 years later down the line into 2009, where Michael Bay decides, hey, we're gonna remake a lot of movies. I think at first, when I first thought of, just putting here real quick, of Friday the 13th, the reboot, I think before I really watched it, I was like, oh, it's a reboot, it sucks. Because the Nightmare on Elm Street reboot sucked. It wasn't as good as the first, and yada yada. This movie, honestly, is A tier. One, you have Jason as the killer the whole time. It is a different version of Jason that we've seen. He is fast, he's brutal, and in this, we're actually able to see more gore. Although, it goes down to with the cons of so much nudity. It's very unnecessary, but it's a Friday film. Everyone's expecting someone's yet to be out. The story overall is very cliche, but again, it's a reboot of the series. It's okay to do that because it's not trying to connect it with the other movies. Technically it's a version of part 2 that we haven't seen, because at the beginning we see Pamela Voorhees die. So technically the Friday 13th reboot is Friday 13th part 2 if part 2 didn't have Paul Holt. But a lot of it is really enjoyable. Like, the story kind of sucks. Yes, understandable. I feel like the assertiveness of Jason makes this movie better, and it's definitely one of the better reboot movies that we've ever had of a horror movie. That's my list. Basically, how it is in order of how I like them. I like, again, with Jason Lives and Final Chapter, those two can be swapped at any time. It's okay. These are my two. I think this is my list for now. Definitely when I review these movies in the future, my list will change. I definitely think. For some reason, I might get more praise of Freddy vs. Jason. Who knows? Probably not, because I'll probably always hate watch this movie for the rest of my life. But there you have it. That's my list. I didn't purposely mean to go off ham on Freddy vs. Jason, but I don't know if it's because I hate watched it the first time I watched it and it made me hate the movie more or what. Or I've just gotten to the point where I just hate early 2000s horror movies. It could be that. But there you have it again. That's my list. Thank you for watching. Tell me your list of your favorite and least favorite Friday films in the comments. I'll probably be replying to them if I have time. I do see your comments, don't worry. There are times where I want to interact with them, but I kind of just don't have time or don't really know what to say to your comments. So if you reply, no, I am looking at your comments. I'm looking at criticisms of me of how I can improve my production a little bit more and everything. I'm trying to improve as a creator for your benefit. So if you have something that you want me to do differently that is in terms of service, let me know. Probably be changing stuff around in January next month, or I'm gonna have a new video out later on in December. I don't know what it's gonna be about yet. I'm gonna hopefully have a good break where I can actually sit down, record, and look at that kind of stuff and get a video out for that. And that's basically all I have. Share this with people who you know. If you're not subscribed, subscribe if you enjoyed it. And until next time, I'll see you then. Bye.